co-working spaces that you could work out of. Post-COVID, we're slowly trying to reopen, but we launched a virtual platform where you can kind of network with community members. You get access to events like these, a huge list of discounts. You'll all get a link to join. It's free to join. It's a pretty cool community and just a great place to look for work too. So you'll get a link for that. Just a bit of background on this event. Obviously, we're dealing with kind of unprecedented levels of people, looking for jobs, changing careers. So we've been running this series with Beacon Hill Staffing to just kind of refresh, as a refresher on various parts of the job hunting process. So this is nailing the interview. So Hannah Horvath is the senior staffing consultant at Beacon Hill Staffing, and I will let her take it away.
Thanks, Mac. Here, let me share my screen and present. All right. You guys can see that?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I haven't presented in Google Slides in a while, so apologies for any errors if I move too quickly. So yes, my name is Hannah. I am a senior staffing consultant at Beacon Hill Staffing Group, and I specifically work on the administrative side. So I place candidates in administrative opportunities. I am originally from Indiana and was there during most of quarantine, but now back in New York, like I said before. And then, of course, with Beacon Hill Staffing Group, our office is not currently open, but we are still all working very hard from home. And then besides the administrative support roles that I place, we do have a team that places HR professionals, legal professionals, tech professionals, life sciences, and accounting and finance as well. So if you all need any connections to any of those teams, just let me know, of course. I'll provide my contact information in the chat after we're done here too. I'm obviously happy to chat further about any of those opportunities that we might be working on that might be a good fit for you. And then for today's event, we're going to go talk about the interviews that are going virtual now. I know that most interviews nowadays are virtual. Some of my clients are still doing some interviews in person, depending on where they're at, if they're outside the city. But I know that most people are doing virtual interviews. We'll chat about some do's and don'ts, questions to ask, and then I'll have you guys, we'll just open the floor for all of you to ask any questions that you might have about interviewing during this time. Of course, if you do have a question pertaining to one of the slides, definitely feel free to jump in. Obviously, I want you guys to contribute as well. So interviewing during a pandemic. Now, the big thing is getting familiar with the platforms that you're going to be interviewing on. Zoom, WebEx, FaceTime. I know there's Blue Jeans. There's just a lot of different platforms out there that, depending on a company, they probably use like a specific one for like a big corporate account. Just make sure that you test the link beforehand, you test your Wi-Fi, all of those good things, and just get familiar with how a platform works, since like the mute button or where the camera is or where your face is could be different along, obviously different for each platform. And then I think the number one question that everyone is being asked is, how have you been handling the pandemic? And I think like people just want to know and have that initial connection right off the bat, which is just so important. So chatting about like any new skills, volunteer work, classes you're taking, certificates you've gotten, anything like that. Just most importantly, staying positive. But I guess for me personally, when we were a little bit slower in the beginning of the pandemic, when things kind of took a dive in the job market, I did a masterclass, and I still have a masterclass account. So I've been taking, I think like I learned from Helen Mirren acting. I'm not an actress, but that was like a fun little thing to do with my sister. But what has everyone else been doing during the pandemic that's been fun, or, learning something new? I know one of my friends learned how to do like knitting.
Oh, I can't see myself, sorry, with the sharing of the screen, but so I hope I'm sort of in focus. I was going to say, one of the things I've been able to do that's made me feel good is I'm a quilter, and so I've been going through and using up a lot of my fabric. One of the best homemade mask materials, they say, is good quality quilting cotton, and so I've been making masks for tons of people. I live in a small town just south of Calgary, and we had a mask bylaw that would come into place when our cases in our town hit X amount. We just hit that yesterday. Unfortunately, I believe we're in a second wave here. So we hit 16 yesterday. We needed to hit 15. So I'm actually going to, I try to do a bit for my job search every day. And then I'm actually going to just start to make masks, and I make the little ear savers with some buttons so that people can pull the elastic back off their ears. So I make those. I'm going to make them and put them in little Ziploc bags in a bucket outside, and just post in my community Facebook page that they're free to grab if you need one, because now it's the law. It's not just recommended. So
yeah, amazing. I love that. Great use of time. And so impactful for the community. Anyone else doing something fun, exciting? Doesn't even have to be that fun and exciting. Mac has been teaching his roosters how not to crow in the middle of the afternoon, right?
I'll share something. I'll share something quickly. It's Lynette. So I'm a marketer and I'm an executive coach. And so one of the communities I'm involved in is around leadership. It's called the Leadership Forum. And so they ended up doing their yearly conference virtually, obviously, because of pandemic at the end of the summer. And they did this initiative called Leadership Lab. Again, it's a nonprofit. It's all volunteer based. And so I just decided, even though it didn't make a lot of sense with my time per se, but I was pretty passionate about it, is we started an initiative around how to help leaders through COVID. And so literally we're in the middle right now of interviewing leaders and just getting a real different perspective, not like a Me Too of, yes, there's a lot of content out there right now around COVID, but what can we learn from leaders in a way that's going to be truly helpful for the next 6 or 9 months for other leaders? And so that's been just really fun, and just a gift to the people that we're interviewing. We thought we were begging them for time, and they are so grateful to be in these interviews, saying that they haven't even had a chance as leaders to self-reflect yet. So it's been it's been rewarding to do that. Yeah, and so that's a share that's kind of unusual, but
Love
another way of looking at it.
A lot of people like to set aside time to talk about themselves, and that's why networking and doing that is just so important.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all stuck at home.
That's great.
I love it. All right. So, virtual pro tips that I've been telling all of my candidates: still dress business professional, at least up top. And you can certainly be comfortable at the bottom, just don't get up during the interview. For guys, I've recommended, a button down and a tie, or a button down and a blazer. For gals, I've recommended, a nice blouse and a blazer, or sometimes just a nice blouse is totally fine depending on the company, but still, dress professionally. I think, when we dress professionally, we then, I think, act a little bit more professional and have a little bit more confidence. Have a neutral background, or a neutral background as much as possible. I've interviewed a couple of candidates that unfortunately had TVs going on mute in the back behind them. Don't do that. Just make sure there's just no distractions behind you. Again, test drive the meeting platform. Make sure your link works. If it doesn't work, give it 5 minutes. Try it again. Sometimes links won't work until the interviewer initiates the call. But of course, just make sure your Wi-Fi works, and maybe 30 minutes before the interview, do a Zoom with a friend or a FaceTime with your mom or daughter or whoever. And then of course, limit the noise and interruptions. Fortunately, I live in New York, but I do live on 3rd Avenue. So there's a lot of construction and noise and sirens going on. I try to limit that as much as possible, but it is what it is. And, of course, if you have dogs or kids or other people working, trying to find a quiet place is just so important for the interview, just so then your focus is completely on the interview and the interviewer versus anything else that might be going on. Obviously, do your best when it comes to that. Kids don't always understand that you're in the middle of an interview. But it is what it is. And most interviewers are going to be nice and, of course, forgiving about things like that. All right. And then I always like to throw this in here because the nonverbal mistakes are done all of the time. Just today, I had a candidate pull up her knee like this and like go like this to the interview. Don't do that. Sit up, sit straight. Know that, you know, your facial expressions, the way you're holding yourself, where your arms are, where your hands are just so important still, especially over Zoom, since you're right there in their face. I think, like, according to some statistics on the sheet that I send out to candidates, 55% of the impression, or that first impression, is made by what you're wearing and how, like, you are presenting your body language. 38% is the quality of your voice. So just making sure, one, you can, like, they can hear you over Zoom or whatever platform, testing out your speakers. That's so important. And then 7% is the words that you actually choose to say, which is just kind of crazy to think about. Eye contact, definitely important, especially when you're on a screen. There have been many times where I've looked at a candidate and they're obviously reading something, like reading something on their phone, or of course, if they preface by saying like they're taking notes or looking something up, that's totally fine, but try to limit the distractions as much as possible and give your full attention to the camera. And of course, most importantly, please remember to smile. And I think, like, that's sometimes forgotten when we're nervous as well. Obviously, we won't, I know the 26% weak handshake, we won't be shaking hands for a while, I'm assuming. So don't necessarily need to know that. But again, I think the presentation from obviously the top up is just so important. Typical interview questions. Tell me about yourself. This is the big one. Usually it's, if it's like a 15 to 20 minute interview, this is probably the only one that's asked. Usually it's like, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. I think the most important thing is to be concise, succinct, and to the point. Have like practice in the mirror or practice with a friend on how to walk through a resume or tell your story. I would say like 2 to 3 minutes max. Keep it work specific, where you are now professionally, what you've learned, why you're excited about something. And definitely, of course, do your research, find out what strengths and qualities the company is looking for, and show that you have them in the answers that you provide or in this answer. Obviously, if you're interviewing for an administrative role, but you weren't necessarily, from my experience, if you weren't necessarily in an admin assistant position, but you were, say, in hospitality where you were scheduling events for a rooftop bar and like you had to provide that customer service, bring up those like scheduling, you know, client facing, those types of qualities that are needed in an administrative assistant role that you have experience with, but not, you know, don't necessarily relate right to the role, but you weren't exactly called that. So I think that's just important to highlight. Just highlight those important skills that someone is looking for. Don't give your life story. I know sometimes it's easy for us to like start talking about ourselves and then keep going. And then of course, try to not answer with unrelated experience. Interviewers don't have a lot of time if they're interviewing candidates back to back to back. So they just want to know right away if you have the experience for this job or transferable skills, and then kind of keep on going. Why should we hire you? Or why do you think you're a good fit for this role? Definitely show the hiring manager that you are uniquely suited to filling the position, that you have those transferable skills. Show that you know some significant details about the company, their general practices, what they do. Obviously, have a success story prepared that highlights these qualities that they're looking for, which should be listed in the job description. Obviously, don't answer with why you want the job, answer with why you are a good fit for the role. I think a lot of candidates kind of get a little nervous, so they get in their head. So when I ask like, oh, why do you want this role, or why do you think this company should hire you, they'll immediately go to like why they want the job versus like how they're a good fit, because it can be kind of a tricky question. Usually what they're trying to look for there is like, why should they hire you? All right. Why did you leave your last job? please try to remain as positive as possible when answering this question for all of the roles that you've had. Obviously, be honest. If it wasn't the best working environment, something happened, it was a bad situation. I think, being honest, explaining the situation, owning if you've made any mistakes, and then saying what you learned from a situation is also really important. Of course, like one of the main ones that people are giving right now is I was laid off due to COVID-19. Totally fine. There was downsizing. I was laid off because of the economy. I know a lot of my candidates were laid off 2008, 2009. Of course, a lot of downsizing happened then, especially within the financial industry. Obviously, try not to be negative about your last role. If you left your last role because the culture wasn't great and unfortunately it was just not a great environment to be in, you can say that, but then like move on. Just say a simple statement and then move on. Again, just honesty and try not to dwell on the negatives. Don't lie if you were fired. Unfortunately, people are fired. Things happen. Again, being honest, short, sweet, to the point, highlighting what you learned from the situation is definitely a good way to go about that. And then obviously a really good, a good interviewer or a good interviewee, good candidate will have questions to ask. And you want to have really thoughtful questions because that makes you stand out, I think, in the crowd. Asking about the previous person and why they were successful in the role. What are the expectations for the role? What is the supervisor's management style? How long has the person that you're being interviewed by been with the company? What has been their experience? Asking about like projects that they're currently working on that this position would then help with, what teams they would be working on. I think now, since you all are interviewing virtually, it's hard to get a sense of the culture and the environment because you're not in the actual office. You're not actually interviewing in the space that you're going to be working from. So it can just be like a hard thing to gauge whether your company is the right fit for you. So you're going to have to ask some of those tough questions of like, you might want to ask to like meet with the team that you're working with and maybe do like a panel interview with everyone or a coffee chat with everyone, and just like what teams would you be working with, like what happy hours are happening virtually, anything that will help you in making your decision. Obviously phrase in a professional way and just try to get to know the culture and the environment as much as possible virtually. I think it's just so important. Obviously, you can ask about something that you've discovered in your company research, like the research that you did about the company as well.
Does anybody have any other questions they like to ask in the interview, or just questions about this part of the interview?
I'll share one if we have a quiet group. One thing I've done, and I encourage others to do. I'm curious to know your opinion on this because it's a little bolder. At the very end, I'll ask something like, "What, if anything, is now that we've spoken and gotten a chance to know each other, what, if anything, might hold you back from moving me forward in the process?"
So I've had some candidates ask me about this. The only thing I don't like about that question is it's negative. So the last thing that an interviewer is going to think about is why you're not qualified for the role. And I don't think that's what you want to leave on,
Yeah. So what would you suggest?
I think always ending on a positive note is great. You can certainly, I think asking about what will make someone successful in the role and what has the previous person been successful, or how has a previous person been successful in the role, is the more positive side of that question for sure. You can also ask what did the past person do that was not successful, but just talking about the past person versus yourself.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Lynette. Okay.
And then any questions for you guys? Have you guys had any questions recently that you were stumped on?
Sorry, I'm just gonna flip through my, there, okay. I just wanted to see how I looked to everyone. In terms of why did you leave your last employer? So I've been told, so I was let go without cause. But so what happened was I was pregnant. It caused a lot of problems at my company. Unfortunately, they were not very family building friendly, I guess. It ended up, I ended up on a stress leave. Then I had the baby. It was a surrogacy. So I was able, like, I don't have the infant in my care right now. I was able to return to work fairly quickly. And then the day that I was supposed to return to work, they called me, of course, with COVID. It was done via phone conference with HR, my supervisor, and said, we're terminating you because of everything that happened leading up to your pregnancy. So they were discussing my pregnancy with other coworkers, and I called them out for it, and they didn't like that. And so I was no longer a team player anymore because I didn't want them discussing these things. And so it was, if not for COVID, I'd have job searched like crazy to not have to go back there anyways. It wasn't a great environment, and the pregnancy just solidified it. One thing that a career transition company told me to say is, since you were terminated without cause, is officially what it says on the form. And what they suggested I say is that I was on a leave and not mention that it was a maternity leave, because people make assumptions about that. So she said, say things like, well, I was really grateful for my time at Ember. Being a small company, I was able to learn a lot, where in a big company, these duties are spread out amongst specified teams and specific teams for these job duties. I was able to do a lot and accomplish a lot, and I learned a lot, which all of that is true. And unfortunately, due to COVID, and it was in oil and gas, so the nature of the business right now, there was no job for me to return to, is sort of what they've been telling me to say. I don't know, is that lying by saying it with that spin, or?
Yeah. So do you have a reference from them?
I have one person in my team who is in the same role as me, and is a lawyer and stuff, and he's said that he will give me a good reference. And I have two people in accounting, so different. I was in land contracts, so different team, and they've said that they would give me reference. And I've got two people who used to work at the company, also both from accounting, who said that they will give me a reference.
Okay. So the lawyer, did you directly report to them?
Nope. He was a bit of a mentor in that he had, we were both senior analysts, but he's got way more experience than me, about 30 years more than me. So not directly reporting, but a lot of like, hey, what do you think I should do about this? Or I've got this and I'm thinking I'm going to do this. Am I on the right track? Or I drafted this clause for this unique situation. Can you just double check I haven't missed something, and things like that. So a lot of sort of mentorship, double checking. The person I reported directly to is actually not very experienced in what I do. So she, and in the end, she obviously didn't like my attitude.
But yeah, so sometimes recruiters will push, because if you don't have like a manager that's going to be a reference, unfortunately, like it was a tough situation, and we can get into like EEOC laws and things like that. So obviously I don't want to get into that with a different company, but what you can say is, if it initially asked, you can certainly gear along more of like, unfortunately, I was laid off due to extenuating circumstances, with COVID-19 and a couple other things going on within the company. It was just time to move on. It wasn't necessarily the best environment to work with, but I did learn a lot. But I'm ready to like find a new company and a new place to call home. If they do push, you can certainly explain. I think like the way that you explained it, you may not want to talk bad about the team or anything like that. Right. You can certainly say like, unfortunately, there was a situation, I was pregnant. There were situations leading up to my leave that caused certain, feelings to be had. And then unfortunately they did end up laying me off too. I think like you're just going to want to be as diplomatic as possible and going into detail, and just try to not to go into as much detail. I think like when you get to offer stages, people will push for references, and then will push for reasons for leaving if you don't have a manager reference. So that's where you're going to have to be like very clear with the recruiter. Okay, this is what happened. It was a bad situation. It is what it is. And most of them will be understanding. That's not something that I would not hire you for, because that was an extenuating circumstance. So I'm really sorry that happened. That does not sound like a good environment.
No, thank you.
Yeah. I think like obviously less is more to start, and then as they push, you can certainly elaborate on certain experiences that you had and what actually happened too.
Excellent. Does anyone have any other questions about anything we covered? Typical interview questions that the interviewer will be asking, questions to ask the interviewer, and just tips for kind of virtual interviewing. Anything anyone want to cover?
Hi guys. I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm sure you're going to cover it later, but in regards to transitioning careers, is that something like I have a really extensive prior career in a different industry, and I'm trying to construct the narrative of, like what I'm bringing into this new industry, which I have like 1 to 2 years of experience in, and position myself as an expert. Not necessarily like, with technical skills in this new industry, but, as a strategist and as a team leader and just as a professional. Is that something that, you should wait for the employer to bring up, or try to craft it into, how you present yourself as the interviewee?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly, when walking through your resume or telling them, like answering the question, like, tell me about yourself, you can certainly talk about your past experience, transferable skills, the fact that you have 1 to 2 years of actual industry experience, and, tell that story and why you're transitioning into that different industry. Was that your question? I mean, I would just certainly include it, and if you get to an interview and they ask you walk through the resume, you can also talk about that in a cover letter.
Yeah, I'm just wondering like how much to integrate it in the actual interview, I guess.
I mean, if you get to an interview, they know from your resume that you have the skills. So I think that, just talking about like the transferable skills that you learned in your past experience, the light industry experience that you have is just going to be very important. Obviously have like the reason why you want to transition into a different industry, because you like that industry, you're interested in it, you want to learn about it, etc. Just have, I would say, like a solidified answer to like why you want to do that transition, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like they're going to want to know. So definitely bring it up in the interview.
Yeah. And thank you guys so much for putting this on. I would put my camera on, but I'm it's not a pretty situation. It's work from home. And
That's stress.
So you don't need to have the camera on.
Yeah, have it on for an interview. I would hope. But yeah, any other questions? I've had a lot of candidates that are transitioning their resumes. I think like, highlighting on it, I think we chatted about this at the last resume workshop that we did, highlighting transferable skills right up, like up front, that directly relate to that new job or that new industry, and being able to talk to why you want that new position or want to learn, or want to transition there.
Sabrina asked if Beacon Hill Staffing has any openings in Canada, or has any.
We do not. I wish.
I mean,
wish
do you guys get lots of virtual, like, are there virtual positions that?
So I do see positions that will start out virtually, but will go in the office. So they usually are only looking for people that are like New York based or probably looking to move to New York, can move to New York and within like a 2-week, 3-week span. But then I've also seen roles that are in the office as well. Not, it's been interesting. We haven't seen a lot of remote work, which you think you would, but we just haven't seen that.
Okay. Well, Sabrina, we'll let you know. We'll let you know
Yeah.
if anything comes through. I had a question about that famous question, which is like, what's that question that interviewers always ask.